The smell of charcoal and lighter fluid should have been comforting. Instead, it made my stomach turn. As I stood on the back porch, watching my family prepare for our annual 4th of July gathering. I'd been coming to these gatherings for 37 years. Same house, same people, same conversations about the weather, work, and who's getting married or divorced this year. But something felt different this time. Wrong. Like looking at a photograph where someone had moved all the furniture just slightly to the left. My sister Karen was arranging potato salad in the same ceramic bowl she'd used since 1987. The crack running down its side hadn't changed, but somehow it seemed deeper now, more pronounced. She looked up at me and smiled, but her eyes didn't move with her mouth the way they should.
"You're early this year, David,"
she said, though I wasn't. I was exactly on time, same as always, 2:30 in the afternoon. I'd been arriving at 2:30 for the past 15 years. Uncle Frank was setting up his portable speakers, preparing to play the same patriotic playlist he'd curated in 2009. Lee Greenwood, Toby Keith, some Springsteen. But when the first song started, the words came out slightly off-tempo. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but I heard it. The rhythm was wrong, like a heartbeat, skipping beats. "Proud to be an American," the voice sang, but it sounded hollow, empty, like someone reading lyrics from a teleprompter without understanding what they meant. I walked over to the picnic table where my cousin Michelle was spreading a red checkered tablecloth. She'd done this exact motion thousands of times, but today her hands moved in slow motion. Each fold, each smoothing gesture stretched out like she was performing underwater.
"Beautiful day for it,"
she said, looking up at the sky. But there were no clouds. There hadn't been clouds for what felt like hours, yet I could swear I remembered seeing them when I first arrived. The children were playing in the yard, running between the adults with sparklers that wouldn't light properly. The sparks fell straight down instead of arcing through the air, hitting the grass with tiny popping sounds that seemed too loud, too sharp. My nephew Tommy ran past me, and for just a moment, his shadow didn't follow. It stayed by the fence for 3 full seconds before snapping back to his feet like a rubber band released. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, everything appeared normal.
"Dad, you okay?"
My daughter Sarah touched my arm. Her fingers felt cold despite the July heat.
"You look pale."
I wanted to tell her about the shadows, about the music that played at the wrong speed, about how her grandmother's lemonade tasted like copper pennies and forgotten promises. Instead, I nodded and forced a smile. Just tired, long drive, but I lived 20 minutes away. Same house I'd lived in for the past 12 years. Sarah knew this. She'd helped me move in. The conversation around the picnic table continued its familiar rhythm. Politics carefully avoided. Sports discussed with forced enthusiasm. Memories shared and reshared until they'd been worn smooth like river stones. But I noticed things, small things, wrong things. My father told a story about the time he caught a bass this big while holding his hands exactly 18 inches apart. He told this story every year since 1994, and his hands had always been 24 inches apart. Always. I had mental photographs of those hands. I could see them in my mind, stretched wide, emphasizing the fish that got bigger with each telling. Now they were closer together. The fish was shrinking. My mother laughed at his story, but her laugh came 2 seconds too late. Like she was reading a script and missed her cue. She reached for her iced tea with her left hand instead of her right, something I'd never seen her do in 4 decades of observation. The flag hanging from our neighbor's porch across the street was moving in a breeze I couldn't feel. 13 stripes instead of 13 stripes. Wait, that was right, wasn't it? 13 stripes, 50 stars. But something about it looked wrong. The red seemed too dark, the blue too pale, like someone had adjusted the color settings on a television. I excused myself and walked to the bathroom inside the house. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. 3 extra steps to reach the door. I counted them twice to be sure. In the mirror, a reflection looked back at me with eyes that seemed too wide, too aware, like it knew something I didn't. I splashed cold water on my face and counted to 10. When I looked up, my reflection was still there, but it was smiling. I wasn't smiling. When I returned to the backyard, the gathering was in full swing. The grill was now smoking, though I hadn't seen anyone light it. Hamburgers and hot dogs sizzled on the grates, their smell mixing with a scent of bug spray and sunscreen to create something that should have been nostalgic, but instead felt nauseating. Uncle Frank was telling a joke about a priest, a rabbi, and a duck. I'd heard this joke 47 times, always a priest, a rabbi, and a duck. But today, it was a priest, a minister, and a swan. The punchline was the same, but it didn't make sense anymore. People laughed anyway. My cousin Mike was flipping burgers with a spatula that clicked against the grill grates in perfect rhythm. 1 click per second, exactly, never faster, never slower. Like a metronome made of metal and meat. Click, 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 click. The sound began to sync with my heartbeat, or maybe my heartbeat began to sync with it. Each click sent a small jolt through my chest, a reminder that something fundamental had shifted in the space between this morning and this afternoon. I sat down in my usual chair, the blue folding chair with the small tear in the armrest, but the tear was on the wrong side. It had always been on the left armrest, where I'd picked at it nervously during family discussions about money and marriage and mortality. Now it was on the right. I stood up and moved to a different chair, the red one that belonged to my brother-in-law, but when I sat down, it felt like my chair. The same sag in the seat, the same loose screw in the back support, like the chairs had traded identities while I wasn't looking. Sarah sat down next to me with a paper plate full of food I didn't remember getting. Potato salad, coleslaw, a hamburger with exact precision, pickles arranged in a perfect line, ketchup applied in a precise circle, lettuce folded at exactly 90-degree angles.
Remember when we used to watch the fireworks from the roof?
I did remember. She was 12, and I'd helped her climb up there despite her mother's protests. We'd watch the city's display paint the sky in temporary colors while eating stolen cookies from the kitchen counter. But that was my brother's house, 2 states away. We'd never watched fireworks from any roof at this house. There was no way to access the roof, no ladder, no stairs, no fire escape, just a steep pitch that would send anyone foolish enough to try sliding directly into the rose bushes below. Yeah, I said anyway. Good times. She smiled and took a bite of her perfectly arranged hamburger. Ketchup leaked out, but it leaked upward instead of down. A small red stream defying gravity, reaching toward the sky like it was trying to return to the bottle. The afternoon wore on. Conversations repeated themselves with slight variations, like a jazz musician playing the same song but changing the key each time. My nephew told the same story about his promotion at work 3 times. But in the first telling he was a manager, in the second a supervisor, and in the third a consultant. Everyone congratulated him each time with the same enthusiasm. The ice in my drink melted and reformed. I watched it happen. Cubes dissolving into water, then somehow crystallizing again into different shapes. triangular ice, hexagonal ice, ice that tinkled against the glass in minor chords instead of random clicks. I wanted to mention this to someone, to point out that ice doesn't refreeze in your drink while you're holding it. But everyone was deep in their conversations, their repeated conversations, their slightly wrong conversations. And I didn't want to be the one to break whatever spell was keeping this gathering together. My father started the grill cleanup, though we hadn't finished eating. He scraped the grates with methodical precision, each stroke removing not just food residue, but somehow also the memory of food. The hamburgers and hot dogs we'd just consumed felt less real with each scrape of his cleaning brush.
Good meal.
Delicious, everyone agreed in perfect unison, though I couldn't remember tasting anything. My plate was empty, but I had no memory of eating. Just a phantom sensation of chewing, swallowing, tasting flavors that might have been there. The sun was getting lower now, but it had been getting lower for hours, stuck in permanent late afternoon, casting the same golden light that photographers call the magic hour. But magic wasn't supposed to last this long. Magic was supposed to fade. Children's laughter echoed from the front yard where they'd moved their games, but it sounded like a recording played through underwater speakers, distant and hollow, like the joy had been drained out and replaced with something that approximated happiness, without actually being it. I walked around the side of the house to check on them. The front yard was empty. No children, no games, just the echo of laughter, continuing to bounce off the houses and trees, a sound without a source. When I returned to the backyard, everyone looked at me expectantly. "Where are the kids?" I asked.
What kids?
My sister Karen replied, though she had 2 children. I'd watched them playing with sparklers an hour ago. Or maybe it was 3 hours ago. Time had become negotiable here, flexible, like warm plastic. Tommy and I couldn't remember the name of her other child. The little girl with pigtails, who always wore the same red dress to family gatherings. She'd been here. I was certain she'd been here.
Tommy's at camp, has been for 2 weeks.
But I'd seen him. His shadow had disconnected from his feet. I'd watched it happen. The conversation turned to dessert. Apple pie, Karen announced, though she'd always made cherry pie for the 4th of July. Always. It was her signature dish, the one thing she was known for in our family. She'd won 2nd place at the county fair in 1998 with that cherry pie recipe. But when she brought it out from the kitchen, it was apple. Golden crust, cinnamon smell, chunks of fruit visible through the decorative slits she'd cut in the top. Perfect apple pie that might as well have been baked by someone else entirely.
My grandmother's recipe.
Our grandmother had been diabetic. She'd never baked anything with sugar, never owned a pie tin, had lived her entire adult life in a studio apartment with a kitchenette too small for baking. Delicious, everyone said after taking their first bites, though I watched the fork go to their mouths and the chewing motions that followed, and the satisfied nods that came after. But somehow, the pie never seemed to get smaller. Each slice remained whole, despite being consumed. Uncle Frank suggested we start the fireworks early this year,
Before it gets too dark.
though darkness was still hours away, had been hours away for hours. He pulled a box from his car trunk, the same box he'd used for years, faded cardboard, held together with duct tape and optimism. But the fireworks inside were different, smaller, newer, brands I didn't recognize, with instructions printed in languages that looked almost like English, but weren't quite right. "Light the fuse and step back 10 feet, I read aloud from one package. But the words kept changing as I read them. Light the step and fuse back 10 feet. Step the light and back 10 fuse. 10 a fuse and light step back.
Having trouble with your eyes? You're getting to that age.
I was 34 old. Same age I'd been at last year's gathering. And the year before that. And the year before that. The first firework launched with a sound like tearing paper. It exploded in the sky, but instead of the usual burst of color, it opened like a flower, blooming in reverse. Colors retreating into themselves, light folding inward until nothing remained but the memory of brightness. Beautiful, everyone murmured. The second firework didn't launch at all. It simply materialized in the sky, already exploded, already fading. Like watching the end of a movie without seeing the beginning or middle. I looked around at my family. They were all watching the sky with the same expression of wonder they'd worn for decades of 4th of July celebrations. But their eyes were empty, reflective like mirrors, showing not what they were seeing, but what they thought they should be seeing. Sarah reached over and took my hand. Her fingers were ice cold despite the summer heat.
This is nice, just like old times.
But this wasn't old times. This was something else, something wearing the costume of old times, playing its part with imperfect precision. I excused myself again and walked to the edge of the yard, where my father's garden used to be. The tomato plants he'd tended with religious devotion every summer since retirement. But the garden was gone. In its place was a perfectly maintained rectangle of grass, as if the garden had been erased with supernatural efficiency. I knelt down and touched the soil. It felt wrong, too soft, too warm, like it was generating its own heat from below. When I stood up, my family was watching me, all of them, turned in their chairs. Heads angled at exactly the same degree, eyes focused with laser precision on my every movement.
Everything okay, David?
Just checking on your tomatoes, I replied.
What tomatoes? I've never grown tomatoes. Allergic to them. Always have been.
But I'd eaten his tomatoes. Sandwiches made with thick slices of beef heart tomatoes, still warm from the sun. He'd been proud of those plants, had talked about them for hours, explaining his watering schedule and fertilizer mixture, and the proper way to tie the branches to stakes. Now he was allergic, had always been allergic. The fireworks continued overhead, each one more impossible than the last. Some exploded before being launched, others launched but never exploded, just kept climbing until they disappeared beyond sight. One burst into the shape of words, but the words were written in a language that hurt to look at directly. My cousin Michelle was taking pictures with her phone, but when she showed them to me, they were all blank. White rectangles where memories should have been.
Must be the lighting. These new phones are so sensitive.
The phone was 7 years old. I'd helped her pick it out at the electronics store. We'd spent 2 hours comparing features and reading reviews, but it looked brand new now. Not a scratch on the screen, not a speck of dust in the speaker grill. As the evening progressed, or as the afternoon continued to pretend to progress toward evening, I realized that nobody had left. In 37 years of these gatherings, people had always started leaving around 8 o'clock. Work tomorrow, kids to put to bed, long drives home. But it was past 9 now, or maybe it was still 4 in the afternoon. Time had become suggestion rather than fact. And everyone was still here, still engaged in the same conversations, still laughing at the same jokes, still existing in this perfect bubble of celebration that refused to end. I announced that I needed to head home.
So early?
Karen asked, though I'd never left early in my life. Work tomorrow, I explained. Tomorrow's Sunday, my father pointed out. Monday, then. Monday is a holiday. Independence Day observed. But Independence Day was today, Sunday. Monday was July 5th, a regular Monday when regular people went to regular jobs and lived regular lives that moved forward in regular time. I walked toward my car, but the driveway stretched longer with each step. What should have been 30 feet became 60, then 90, then more. The car got smaller in the distance instead of larger as I approached. Behind me, the party continued, laughter that sounded like a recording, conversations that repeated with minor variations, fireworks that bloomed and faded and bloomed again in the same patterns. I reached for my car door handle, and my hand passed through it like it was made of water. The car was there and not there, solid and transparent, real and fake all at the same time. When I turned back toward the house, my family was standing at the edge of the driveway, all of them, perfectly still, watching me with those mirror eyes that reflected everything and revealed nothing.
Where are you going, David?
Sarah asked, though her mouth didn't move. This isn't real, I said aloud, the first true thing I'd spoken all day.
What's real?
My mother replied.
This is our family. This is our tradition. This is where you belong.
But it wasn't. Not anymore. Maybe it never had been. I began walking down the street instead, past houses where I'd grown up, where neighbors I'd known since childhood continued their own 4th of July celebrations behind windows that showed scenes from different decades. The Johnsons grilling in their backyard, but Mr. Johnson had died 3 years ago. The Millers watching fireworks from their porch, but the Millers had moved to Florida in 2018. Each house was frozen in its own perfect moment of celebration, its own bubble of time where nothing ever changed and nothing ever ended. I kept walking, past the elementary school I'd attended, which looked exactly as it had in 1987, past the corner store that had been demolished and rebuilt twice in the past decade, but now stood in its original 1960s configuration, neon signs buzzing with electricity and possibility. The further I walked, the more the world revealed its seams, street signs that pointed in directions that didn't exist, traffic lights cycling through colors that had no names, mailboxes for houses that were there and not there, existing in the spaces between what was and what should be. I found myself at the park, where the city held its official fireworks display. Thousands of people spread across blankets and folding chairs, all watching the sky with the same expression of manufactured wonder I'd seen on my family's faces. But the fireworks weren't happening in the sky. They were happening in people's eyes. Reflected explosions of light that had no source, colors that bloomed in pupils and faded in irises. Everyone was watching their own private show, projected from inside their own minds. A child ran past me, chasing a sparkler that left no trail. Her parents called after her, but their voices came from empty spaces where people used to be standing. I sat down on a bench that might have been real and watched the crowd that might have been there, celebrate a holiday that might have been happening in a country that might have existed. The flag at the center of the park hung perfectly still, in a breeze that moved nothing else. 50 stars, 13 stripes, colors that shifted between red, white, and blue, depending on how directly I looked at them. I understood now. This wasn't memory. This wasn't tradition. This wasn't celebration. This was the thin line between what we remember and what actually happened, between what we want our families to be and what they actually are, between the holidays we think we're celebrating and the emptiness we're actually trying to fill. I'd been coming to these gatherings for 37 years, watching the same people have the same conversations, while slowly becoming less themselves and more like the roles they thought they should play. until eventually there was nothing left but the performance, the perfect 4th of July, the perfect family, the perfect celebration of a perfect idea that had never actually existed. I stood up from the bench and began walking home, not to the house where the party continued without time, but to the real home, the one where I lived alone, where the walls were the right color, and the furniture was arranged the way I'd left it, and the clock moved forward like clocks are supposed to do.
The walk took exactly 20 minutes. Same as always. I unlocked my front door with a key that worked on the first try, turned on lights that illuminated rooms I recognized, sat in a chair that sagged in the right places and belonged to me alone. In the distance, I could still hear the echo of celebration. Laughter without joy, fireworks without fire, conversations without connection. Tomorrow, there would be cleanup to do, dishes to wash, decorations to store, thank you calls to make. The normal aftermath of a normal gathering that had happened in a normal world, where time moved forward and people were themselves, and apple pie stayed apple pie, even when you weren't looking at it. But tonight, I sat in my real chair, in my real house, and listened to the real silence that follows real events, the kind of quiet that doesn't repeat itself, doesn't echo, doesn't try to convince you of anything except that it's over. And in that silence I realized something that should have been obvious all along. The reason everything felt wrong wasn't because the gathering was fake. It was because I was the only one there who was still real.
If you're wondering what's real, maybe you should sign up for the channel's newsletter for new stories.